All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit more about this idea of film scoring with Maschine. And I've got my Maschine here on camera, so you can get a sense for how I use it. Now, the main thing to keep in mind when you're doing film scoring, in my view, is staying in the creative process, staying in a creative flow. And using MIDI devices, is really essential to that workflow. In my opinion, it's like night and day, but there is a steep learning curve, and I'm hoping to help some composers address the learning curve on the Native Instruments gear, the MK3 particularly. But also just realize that, if you're like me, a Cubase user, you get into the MIDI mapping and stuff, and your head starts to boil over and you start feeling like it's more work than it's worth. Trust me, it's really not. I mean, even if it takes you months to really get your head wrapped around it, which it might take that long to really get your head wrapped around it. It might only take you an hour to get something functional. I've been working with MIDI for like 15 years, and it has often frustrated me. But I would say it's like a computer. It's a frustrating thing. It conks out on you, causes problems. You have driver conflicts, stuff like that, and it sucks. But at the end of the day, what a composer can do with a computer versus not is like night and day. So I definitely recommend using a device. Now, if you go ahead and you get something like this, like the MK3, and you're using it with the Maschine, it's already integrated, right? Native Instruments has already done a lot of work to figure this out. Likewise, there are interfaces for a lot of DAWs. If you buy something that's professional grade, one of the big advantages there is that it's been designed by software engineers to work with your gear, and you don't have to fiddle-faddle so much. Okay, so anyway, that's my 2 cents, but I don't want to get off topic too much. I want to talk about how the interface works for me, specifically in the context of what we have already talked about. This idea I talked about last week of the editor and the director come to me constantly with new edits, and I need to be able to work with that. So let's take a Cubase example, and I've got this video here. Let's get this up on my screen, and I want to be able to move my scenes around. I'm going to take myself off here so you can see, let's say I get this new edit and it's playing up here. This is just kind of a dummy up here, but let's say that, I want this drum beat. So I've got this drum beat. I've got one with a tambourine, and then it comes into like a drum beat. Let's say that I want that drum beat earlier because of the edit. I can just move this up here, and that's going to fire this scene earlier because of using MIDI triggers to trigger scenes. I covered that in a previous video. But when I'm doing this from my MK3, or sorry, my combination of MK3 and my S49, which is a Komplete Kontrol keyboard, I don't have a camera on that, but it's right here underneath me. I can do controls like this. I can, start playback, stop playback, hit record, things like that. And being able to navigate around like this really helps. I have some buttons and knobs on my device that do things like set, I can zoom in, zoom out, things like that, so that I can be at my keyboard the whole time. But the MK3 is where I'm going to come into these scenes, right? So let's pull up my instrument here, and make sure we got my instance of Maschine up here invisible. All right, so when I'm here, I've got these 3 scenes. You can see them being triggered up here. Scene 3 will get triggered just now. There you go. Now back to scene 1. So being able to see those scenes, I can see that actually on my hardware. So let's just look at that. I'm going to take myself off again. And so if I go into the arranger view, which is just a one button hit, I don't have to even go into my software. I can see scene 1, 2, and 3. I can't rename them. That's something you can only do with a keyboard, but you know, that's a one-time thing. But let's say that I play this back. Again, I'm hitting play from my keyboard, right? So from my S49, could be any MIDI interface. I can see my scenes changing. And it's going to come up for scene 3 change. Now I might decide that that like plucky sound that's on there is a little too loud. So in the Maschine environment, this is not really intended as a tutorial on Maschine. This is just kind of whetting your appetite if you're not used to Maschine. So I can go into my mixer here. I can come over here to my world of plucking instrument. And let's say that I decide that that's just a little too loud. I'm going to go ahead and loop this plucky part. I can actually see the mixer right here, and I can just bring that down. And in that way, you know, I'm staying totally in the creative flow. I'm used to a mixer. I mean, it's a really nice visual. But then when I want to, let me pull up, there we go, get myself out of there. But now, okay, so I fixed that problem. Nice work, Will. I'm going to go back to my arranger, and I'm going to say, well, you know, on scene 1, I don't want the plucks. I guess they were off. Scene 2, you know, I could decide, as I did here, between scene 1, which has the tambourine, and scene 2, which has the main. I can change which thing I'm going to have there. You know, if I went to scene 1, for example, and I was going to have the fill, scene 2, I'm going to have the tambourine, and scene 3, I'm going to have the main drums. Now I can do all that on my interface here. I'm totally in a creative flow. I've seen my scenes and loops. I can actually record more of these patterns into my different channels, into my groups is the right term for Maschine. So it gives me total flexibility for composing, and then total visual experience for putting together the scenes. And then if I need to adjust where those scenes hit for my edits, I do that in my DAW. So let's see what this sounds like, right? So I'm going to go back to Cubase, and this should work pretty much the same in any DAW. So I've got my, I'm going to bring these just a little closer so we don't have to wait so long for them. All right. And then I had that drum fill. There we had the tambourine. Okay, now we got the drums. So it's really nice to just be able to stay in my creative workflow, like, you know, what I want there is a flute, or what I want there is, you know, a harpsichord, or what I want there is a synthesizer, whatever it is. I can just kind of play around with it, see how it sounds. All this stuff that's happening over here in Cubase is kind of like, that's for my edit. That's when I have to deal with what the editor or the director wants from me in terms of timing. But I can kind of abstract that away from the composition, like, how's my music sound? What kind of emotions am I conveying? What kind of instrument choices am I making? I love it that I can work on that within Maschine with my hardware. It's very intuitive. And I can work completely separate, really, from the editing process. But then when it's time to edit, I can just bring it in. So here's another workflow killer, at least, that I have found a solution for, and I'd be really remiss if I didn't cover this. And that is, you'll notice here that when I am playing, when these events in Cubase play back, you'll notice, for example, that the tambourine doesn't come in until about there, even though it's triggered back here, right? So listen to it. You have the fill. The fill continues. Now you get the tambourine. Oh, delayed again. Now you get the real drums. Why is that? It's so annoying. So let me make this a little more obvious for you, right? We should get the drum fill here, and the minute that my scene 2 triggers, right? It's logical that, well, I should hear the tambourine there, but I don't. And you'll notice this. Watch again. So, got my drum fill. That wasn't a good example. Sorry about that. Let's go a little earlier because the drum fill did actually end. You see that? There's a major delay. It's not triggering right on time. Why is that? Well, this has to do with a setting within Maschine, and it's absolutely vital for this particular work. But it's part of your creative process. You have to make a decision here. It's not just a one thing you set and it's always awesome. It has consequences both ways. So if I look at, I'm going to take myself off here. If we look at Maschine, up here, we have different triggering options. And what these are is very much similar to a whole lot of other systems. Ableton comes to mind, where you can decide when the next switch is going to happen, right? Do you want to happen immediately, even if the timing gets disrupted, or do you want to have it happen every bar, every quarter, every eighth, that sort of thing? And it's a way of making sure that when you switch scenes, that the groove never gets interrupted, which can be kind of disastrous. So I've set this to off up here. And what that means is that it will switch scenes immediately. But I also have re-trigger off. And what that means is that it's going to keep playing essentially to maintain the groove. It's going to switch as soon as humanly possible without disrupting the groove. If I turn on trigger, you're going to see, or re-trigger, sorry, and we listen to this again, you're going to see that actually when this comes in here, it actually kind of disrupts the rhythm. And you get this weirdness. I don't like that, right? So that's because it didn't start the new scene when it switched from scene 1 to scene 2. It didn't start scene 2 on a beat that was going to make musical, rhythmic sense with scene 1. It just goes right in. Now, sometimes I really want that. I'll give you some examples. Let's say I'm not playing around with a score that has heavy rhythmic elements like drums and percussion, but it's more ambient, right? Maybe there's like, it's a spooky scene or a tense scene. And the sounds and track that I'm working with is more like ambient. There's like a crash, or there's like a sort of eerie whistle or some kind of metallic paddy sound, right? It's not rhythmic, and I need it to hit at a very specific time. Well, then I definitely want to have re-trigger on, and I want to have it set, the grid set to off. Let's look at the MK3 and see how we could set this up, see what we can set up anyway. So down here, I don't know if you can see it, but this follow button right under it says grid. If you hit shift, then it's a grid button. Without shift, it's a follow button. So if I open that up here, I see in this window a variety of different grid options, and they are the same grid options that I have over here in Maschine. Pull this up. When I click on this little drop-down box, these options here, they are the same as, get rid of that. They are the same as these options here. So I can set that to off from my hardware, or I can set it to, 1 bar by hitting this pad here. And now when I go into Cubase and I go back and I play it, you'll notice that everything's going to stay, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I have to turn off re-trigger. Otherwise, it's going to sound terrible. So let's do that. Turn off re-trigger, go back here. It's going to maintain groove. Sorry. The groove is maintained because I turned re-trigger off. And it's doing it based on a bar, because that's what I chose here. Now, if I turn this to off with that pad, Then I go back. I get much the same outcome here. The groove is maintained because I don't have retrigger turned on, but it is switching the scenes immediately. It's just playing them through to keep rhythmic cohesion. Unfortunately, from the hardware, there's nowhere I've found where I can enable retrigger from the hardware. So that's something, unfortunately, that I have to do within the VST software. I find on a project basis, I tend to have retrigger on or off, and I almost always have it on because I almost always want these things to fire exactly when I say so in Cubase. All right, so now I've got this. It's going to disrupt and you also hear that for a little bit of time there, it's playing both loops. That can be kind of frustrating. So that's one solution, is to use retrigger, and it's the one that I find generally works the best for me. But there are other options in Cubase, at least. I can use free warping if I wanted to. Let me see, where's that tool right there? I'm looking at a big monitor that's kind of far away, but I can actually decide, okay, you know, I want this to match that point in my video. I can actually stretch the grid, and then I can you know, have this snap to my new grid. So that's another option if your DAW supports grid warping, that sort of thing. And then you can manage exactly which beat in Maschine is being firing. Let me show you in Maschine here. You'll notice that as you can see my cursor up here where I'm mousing around. You can see my cursor moving around up top in that ruler. That's my Cubase. And you can kind of see it down here at the bottom as well, right? If I go into this clip here, you'll see that I'm actually moving. I'm going to take myself out of the picture again. You can see that as my Cubase cursor moves, so does the cursor move in Maschine. And that's because it's getting the host timing, right? Even when retrigger is on, I'm going to see that action. And you can kind of see, let me actually zoom in here. You can see here that as I adjust my cursor in Cubase, it's actually filling up the, you know, those little slots that indicate the timing on my loop. If you're an Ableton user, you might, you know, be used to that exact display. If you're a Maschine user, of course, you're used to it. But my point is that there is a host tracking, there's a rhythmic tracking, what bar and beat you're on within Maschine when it's running as a VST, that is getting that information from the host, and that's because you're running Maschine as a VST. So there, you can actually use this as a way to figure out, let's say you were going to use grid warping, you could use it to figure out, well, where do I want which measure to be, you know, like at what point, if I warp my grid by this much and there's an offset of one measure or one beat within how Maschine's playing it back, and you're trying to finagle that, you're trying to figure out how to refine that, then you can come in here and you can move your cursor around, again, having a piece of hardware like my S49, which is what I'm using to move the cursor right now, is super, super helpful. I also have a loop deck CT, which can be really helpful for this as well if I'm mobile and I don't want to bring a big keyboard. But as long as you have retrigger selected up here in the grid options, then that's going to work out really well in terms of where you see it triggering in your DAW is where it's going to trigger. So those are the main workflow enhancements that I think are really crucial. Using hardware, having a keyboard for a key bed so that I can quickly input notes. I love the, let me switch back here. I love a lot of the options on the MK3. I love the big screens. Let's go back. I can see my groups. I can see the instruments that I have set up here. So if I wanted to load up a new sound, I can come in here and, you know, I'm going to load in, let's say, some kind of synth sound like that. And then I've got that ready to play. I can use the chords feature, which creates chords according to my scale. So I could say, well, I want major diatonic chords. Now I've got, that's right, so I've got a C major. My root is C. I've got C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G7 or G major, A minor, B half diminished, going back up to a C. So I can change my harmony. I can like just knock out some simple chords there. What else do I love? I love being able to change the tempo. So if I go into Cubase here and I have this looping, right? And I come in here, I'm going to change the tempo. I can do that very easily and modify essentially the pace. Well, it's actually, it's resetting because I set up that audio warp. I'd have to go and just undo that, but I like being able to change the tempo. Standalone version of Maschine works very well too, and you can actually build out a composition in there, and then you can open it within the VST, right? You can come up here right there, and you can go to the open menu or the file menu, and you can see different projects that I've had open in Maschine. So I can write the music in the standalone, still open in the VST with all the instruments, all the settings and all that stuff, which is nice if I want to make music on the go, but bring it back into my studio for some, because I have a lot of really great equipment in here that helps me do the professional stuff, make sure I have the right bit rate and a faster processor for rendering and big screens for monitoring the video, stuff like that, that I don't have when I'm working in a coffee shop or something. But a lot of times I like to just be around people, drinking some coffee and writing music. So you can use the Maschine standalone and then bring it into the VST. That's another great workflow enhancement. On the MK3 here, I can change channel settings around my mixer here. So I can, of course, I showed you earlier how you can mix, but if I wanted, my pad group here to have different inputs or outputs, I can change those. If I wanted to send them, you can't see it here, but there's stereo outputs for analog outputs, and there's a headphone output here. So I can also use the MK3 as an audio interface. Again, if I'm working remotely and I just want to be able to plug in my headphones and hear what I'm working on. I don't do a lot of sampling, but the sampling capability here is pretty amazing. So let me see. I don't think I have an input coming in here right now, but you'd actually see if you were doing sampling here, you could go into, okay, I'm going to create a new group, and I'm in sound 1, go to sampler, and I would see like a level meter here showing audio input, however I configure that. And then I can start sampling it, and then I can edit it, trim it, truncate it, all these different things. If you're into sampling, or if you wanted to resample some element of your production, it's extremely powerful that way. The arranger as well is great. I've talked in my last lesson about how I use this for layering. I may have that tambourine in there on scene 2, but when I put it to the video, the director says, nope, conflicts with the vocals, the dialogue. We need to kill that tambourine. So I use my hardware, take it out, it's gone, work done, So the scenes here make a big difference. You have this ideas versus song view. I don't want to get overwhelmed in all of the features of Maschine. What I'm trying to do is illuminate how these can help you optimize your workflow. And in the arranger view here, the song view, in the song view, sorry, you're looking at the wrong thing. Let me give you my hardware. In the song view here, it is enabling me to create more like a linear DAW style recording with tracks that move horizontally, and you can drag stuff around. It doesn't have to be pattern based. Whereas Ideas view is this thing where you've got patterns and you can kind of add patterns in, decide what you want to do for each scene, customizing each scene. So arranger, mixer, you also have plug-in effects. So, you know, I've got this drum, let's say. I've got this kit here. Let me put this on a loop that will demonstrate this most clearly. Where's my drums? See, so now I can go in here and I can see, oh, I don't have any drums on there. Now I've got drums. All right. But let's say I wanted to filter these drums. I can come into my plugin settings, and this is all from my hardware. I'm going to bounce over here. I'm going to add, you know, a filter, load that up. And now I've got all these effects on the bottom here. So I can do that kind of work. Being able to just, you know, do that from my hardware. When I'm in the creative flow, I'm looking at something visual and I'm thinking about the way I want my filter to sound. I'm not having to reach for my mouse, look through menus and stuff like that. It's, for me, just a way better workflow. Now, if you have any questions on any of this, please leave comments, like and subscribe to the video if you like what I'm doing. I'm going to be here in a couple of days again. I'm going to be addressing a new topic. I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to talk about next, but I promise I'll be here. And I would love it if you'd subscribe to the channel. I love it if you'd leave a comment, even leave me a question, and I'll cover a topic that you ask for in my live stream. And thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.